You can help support the channel by heading to our merchandise store and picking up some of our great aircraft designs created by our graphic designer. We have everything from fighters to transport aircraft, which you can choose to have printed on t-shirts, mugs, stickers and much more. Head to the description below and click the links and pick up your design today. Thank you and enjoy. Rudy, when did you become interested in aviation?
Yes, this was quite early. When I was 10, Neil Armstrong went on the moon, and actually I wanted to become an astronaut. But, in Germany to become astronaut at that time, it was very difficult. So, yes, this was when I said, okay, go into the air, this would be fine as well. So around 10 to 11, I had my dreams to go into the air, and from then on, I followed it.
And you got there, and we're going to get into that. But yeah, so what year did you actually join? And can you talk us through some of the aircraft you initially trained on?
Yes, I joined in July 1978, so quite early. It was still the time when we had the Cold War. At the beginning, it was like this, that you do the officer school and all the other stuff. And I was lucky, I could even study at the military university. So I did the screening in 1980. It was on a Piaggio P149. It's a very old-fashioned single-prop aircraft developed by the Italians. The Germans used it quite long for the screening. Then at that time, it was decided that the F-104 would have been replaced by the Tornado. So they were looking for a lot of, let's say, we call it weapon system operator. So after the screening, it was decided that I went on the back seat, on a back seater. So I went to its Mesa Air Force Base in Sacramento, where you do the NAF and as well as the weapon system operator course. It's, I think, a little bit different from the British. So you do already some tactical missions in the US on a T-37. So after the T-37, you go back to Germany. And at that time, the German did an intermediate aircraft. It was the Alpha Jet, which is, I think, close to the Hawk.
Yeah.
So I flew 50 hours on the Alpha Jet here, which is a very nice airplane. You get even as a NAV or WSO a lot of flying hours because you can fly it from the back, and it's more even for, let's say, flying training. The issue is that Alpha Jet is not so fast, let's say 300, 350 knots. So it's intermediate and it's not as complex. And then you go directly to Tornado, where I was in 1986 at the TTTE in Cottesmore. All the Germans were trained in Cottesmore. So yeah, this is how I came to the
Tornado. Yeah. What were your first thoughts on the Tornado? I think it's an absolute beauty. What did you think?
Yes, the Tornado. It's if you come via a T-37 or via an Alpha Jet to the Tornado, you see how complex the aircraft is. Already from, let's say, from the avionics, not only that you. So in the German Air Force, the WSO always have to, let's say, monitor a little bit all the instruments, the attitude, the altitude, vertical speed, etc. And of course, you're responsible for the navigation. At that time, we had the inertial navigation system, which was just a, let's say, poor navigation system, not with GPS or laser. So I found it really good, but complex, and I really was astonished. I'm an aerospace engineer as well, so I got a little bit information about this. And the Tornado is really good. It was the first fly-by-wire aircraft developed by 3 nations, and I think at that time it was state of the art. So already technically I was astonished, but from the performance in respect to the aircraft I flew before, it was amazing.
And if you wanted to, go into the Air Force and especially fast jets, did you need a degree, or was that just a bit helpful from what you studied?
Yes, normally, in the German Air Force, pilots and navigators do not study. It was an exception. At that time, the German Air Force wanted to try something, so it's very unusual. But I think I used it to get a little bit more deeper into the tornado and other stuff. But this would, to go really deep in it, it would last another 30 to 45 minutes because I really know a little bit, maybe on other interview, but it has nothing to do with the flying part, because the technically things on the tornado is really great, I think.
So let's talk about Cottesmore. Fascinating place, and I've heard great stories from it. Talk about a bit your ground and flying training, and what was it like working with the other nations?
Yes, I wanted to get into the British squadron because I wrote a little bit before, and I heard it would be more tough, and it was really more tough than the German and the Italians. Yeah. And actually, I got a really, really, let's say, experienced flight lieutenant as a, let's say, the pilot who I flew with most. And at the ground school, it was, to be very honest, of course, difficult. You have to learn all the systems, all this, everything from the back seat, from the front seat. It was really, really, let's say, hard work, but I think I survived pretty good. And the flying, I think, in Britain was great. We went already down to 200 feet. I was happy because the British squadron went for 2 weeks to Lossiemouth. So I had even some exercises already at that time in good old Scotland. And to be very honest, I enjoyed it. So it's 3 to 4 months. On the other hand, I took my family. I had already a kid at that time with me to Cottesmore. So we lived in Oakham, where you have already 2 pubs in a town with 200 inhabitants. So it was very nice. So yet on the Rand and water. No, Cottesmore was really nice. So actually, we had all the missions and we went forward to it. And after 3 to 4 months, I finished. I think it was in September 1986.
And was each jet different to cater to the other nations' requests from the government, or were they all generally the same systems inside?
I think at the TTTE, the aircraft was quite similar. There was not so much difference at the very beginning. Later on, especially the British, they developed GR1 and GR4. The German did a different development, but at Cottesmore, the jets was quite the same because we flew in all aircraft. Every nation have to bring 1/3 of the aircrafts to Cottesmore, and actually, I didn't really see a difference.
And you always flew clean, so that must have been fun.
Yes, it was even better. It was not only operational clean, so we didn't have all the stuff where you have put the tanks and the weapons on. It was a fully clean aircraft, and of course the performance was much higher. And I think this was the only time when we flew even beyond Mach. But actually, it's very funny. You do not know when you go beyond Mach 1.0 unless you look on the instruments, because there's no sound. The tornado is very silent. Even when the cockpit is closed, when you start the engines, everything outside, it's so noisy. 104 to 110 decibel, and inside it's really calm. Wow. And what I found is, I had 2 flights on the F-104 later on. It's really comfortable, even if let's say the reclining of the seats could be a little bit more, like to the F-16, to stand the Gs a little bit better. But actually, the tornado, you had enough place to put your stuff, your pups, or what you need. At the time we flew with maps. No, actually, it was quite good aircraft.
And can you talk to us about some of the strengths or weaknesses of the Tornado?
I think the main weakness, what I say, I do not know for how the British make it, but for the Germans later on, they reduced the engines, the TBT, the turbine belly temperature, by about 10%, which give a lot of, let's say, less thrust. So, but this was to enhance the lifetime of the engines. Actually, this was, I think, one of the most weaknesses. On the other hand, this aircraft have a very, very good avionic and a very good, let's say, flight control system. I think one of the best I've ever seen. I was lucky in Goose Bay could fly an F-16, and it's very close to this. And because actually this aircraft, if you fly it good, basically you can only depart if you really make big errors. Yeah. Actually, I had one happening, and I can take later on it, but the aircraft behaves really, really safe. The other thing, the inertial navigating system with Kalman filter and all the stuff, it was really, really perfect designed. So without any GPS or precision, let's say, navigation system, you could fly the Tornado already quite precise for attacks and so on. What was at that time, I was on Alpha Jet and on other aircrafts, much more difficult. And what I think is the swept wing approach was at that time quite good. You could be very fast with the swept wings down. On the other hand, the approach speed was 140 knots plus 4 kilograms per 1,000 tons. So you could really approach very low. The aircraft have slats and flaps. You could make very good slow flight. As I said, overall avionics, I think it was, it was developed in the 1970s, and I think it was state of the art.
And it's still going strong today, so.
Yes, I think what they did is, you had this aircraft basically have no, we call it in the technical part, ground effect. Actually, you can fly the aircraft with 480 knots down to the ground, and you could land if it would be possible. You have no bumping effect because the big ailerons, they make everything, let's say, smooth, which is very seldom. Some other aircraft really have ground effects at that time. Today, of course, with with technology, we make it. But at that time, it was, I think, a good, let's say, development.
So before we got into your frontline squadrons, let's talk a bit about your cockpit and the systems you were using. How difficult was it for you to master, and did you ever master it?
I think after, I have nearly 2,000 hours on the back seat, so I think after a while you master it. The Germans have an approach with limited combat ready and combat ready. They bring you up. And at the beginning, of course, you have to learn a lot, because at the beginning you can fly the aircraft, but you cannot fly it tactically. We go to Jever, which is the first part where you get a little bit, let's say, for the air to ground. At the beginning, you start only with air to ground. You have to learn how all this radar and the navigation system, the weapon system, everything what is in, how you have to handle it. And, it's like with, I'm a motorbike driver. I compared with this, only training helps. So you fly and fly and fly, which at that time in Germany was really possible. I had at the average 180 to 200 hours per year, which is today in the German Air Force, I think, would be a very high number. and even in the squadrons, you have a lot, we called it, let's say you have a kind of schedule you have to fly every year. There's a quite big list with air-to-air refueling, with bombing evacs, and even with let's say air-to-air. No? You have to learn how to defeat against fighters. Not to shoot them down, but that you can safely escape without being shot down. So this is done, of course, in the squadron. It takes you 1 to 2 years, and then they put you to exercises.
Yeah, so what was it like going to a frontline squadron for the first time and, like really feeling part of something? That must have been brilliant.
Yes, I was at first thing. I was shortly, let's say, sent to Lechfeld, which is in the south. They had IDS, but only on the conventional part. Later on, the Lechfeld was this squadron which have the ECRs, so the Seat type aircraft. But I was quite fast, not even after 2 years, transferred to Memmingen, which is in the very, very nice Allgäu. So at the end, I was happy because I'm in the really, really nice region, and it was really good. I was transferred because this was the last wing which have been transferred from F-104 to Tornado. So I got a great amount of flying hours at the beginning because I was flying in both squadrons, in the morning in the one squadron, in the afternoon in the other one, because they had, I do not know, they had, I think, 60 pilots, but only 20 enough.
That's amazing. That's great. So yeah, flying around Europe, did you mix with other nations when you were just doing your little normal sortie on a day? Would you, get bounced by whatever's out there?
Yeah, at that time, Germany was quite dense with military aerodromes. We had the US, we had the UK, we had even the Canadian. So I think there was not a single day where it didn't met, I do not know, F-16 or an F-18, not the Super Hornet, the normal Hornet or other aircraft when you're flying around. And of course, you react with them. Now, actually, we trained our, let's say, air to ground at different targets, at that bombing range, or we flew up to the north or around Munich, how we called it, and into the close to the Alps or so. But actually, whenever you went, we had some low fly areas at that time. You always met somebody, and then you did really good practice with different kind of nations and aircrafts. At that time, it was even allowed. At that time in Germany, you were allowed to fly 500 feet in general, so 180 meters, and but for the attack, you were allowed to fly 200 feet. Later on, they stopped it, but this was shortly before I left the Air Force.
Rudy, did you ever fly on the nuclear roll with the Tornado?
Yes, in Memmingen they have this dual role. We were purely IDS, but we were IDS on the conventional role and on the strike role. The strike role was, of course, with the US. Germany never had and still do not have own nuclear bombs. This is together with the NATO, that the US is providing this nuclear bombs in case of, yes, at that time, we had the NATO doctrine, massive retaliation. So it was really hard, and it was only selective use. Selective use means that you would have had dedicated targets within the Warsaw Pact in case they would have attacked and, let's say, let's say, crossed the border, the inner German border, or have began to bring troops into Europe. So this was only a kind of self-defense situation, but we had real nuclear bombs. This was foreseen. It was a little bit lower in the, let's say, in the detonation, but of course not like ballistic missiles, but and it was dedicated targets, as I said, selective use. Yeah.
So I know you've been on a few large exercises like Nellis. What was that like? That must have been so much fun bringing a Tornado over there.
Yes. Besides the maple flag in Canada and red flag in Nellis, this is, it's different because this is, I think, I was the first time in 1992. For me, this was really, let's say, close to war, because so many nations with so many aircraft with so different roles. You were trained, how we was always called, blue against red. So you were really attacked. And what I was really astonished of was the briefing and debriefing capabilities of the Nellis Air Force Base. You must compare it with a big cinema. It's unbelievable. And afterwards, you see the real mission flying. Of course, you do not see the real aircraft, but you see your artificial aircraft flying, what you did. Or when you have been shot down, then you were put out of the scenario. So it's really realistic. And afterwards, you really debrief not only on your mission, but on the overall Comeo, what was good, what was bad. Then you have all the ground system on the attacks. What when they attack you, like SA6, SA8. Of course, you have the fighters coming to you. You have AAA. Everything was there. On the other hand, it was the only place, if I remember correctly, where you can drop chaff and flares, actually. So you could really defeat like you would defeat in a real scenario. So besides that, we didn't bomb real bombs. It was, I think, so close to war that yes, they could be trained. And I think the Americans established this because of the lessons learned by Vietnam. And I think it was great. So I went there 2 or 3 times, and it was amazing. And of course, you met a lot of guys. You met these people who fly other aircrafts. You make an exchange. What are, let's say, the capabilities of them? What are your capabilities? So for it's a very nice conversation with F-16 guys, and they were really, let's say, astonished when we were flying so low, 100 feet, that they had problems to make targeting, to get the target tracking on us, even if they had see us, because of the ground clutter. It was so close to the ground. So it was really nice to get this.
Yeah, absolutely. And what was it like? Were the Americans fascinated with the tornado, like, going that close? And like, how did it work on a social scale outside of the actual flying?
Yes, I think it's when I went to Nellis 1992, and I think 2 or 3 days later, the Americans, they had already GPS, and they had or kind of this, and they had let's say laser guided bombs. And we had dumb bombs. They were just ballistics,
Right.
At the beginning, we had no. It was just either retarded or unretarded, and we were hitting the targets, and they were asking why. And so I explained a little bit the technical part, why it is so good, why, and so they were really astonished. And but even about the performance in respect to how capable the crew was to fly for such a long time in such a low environment. Flying in 100 feet was not automatically possible, only by the crew. Automatically was only to 200 feet. And they really said, oh, this is very hard. But in the tornado, if you had a good crew, it was because of the good aircraft possible. And of course, you have Las Vegas in the vicinity. So afterwards, flying in Nellis and being on the strip is on the day, or when you have night missions on the night. But when you have day missions, you go to the slot machines or to whatever. Of course, this is... I never understood why the Americans have such a base close to Las Vegas.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
No, this
yes,
was great.
yeah, I can imagine. But do you have any memorable stories from your time at Nellis or any other flags?
Actually, these were all normal sorties, so we had no incidents or accidents. Big cameos. It's basically every day is a big cameo. You do not fly only with 2 aircrafts there. It's always a big exercise. Actually, of course, at that time when I flew, they flew B-52 and B-1B. So it was really, and they still had the F-111. So it was, and the F-111 is, another type of aircraft. They go nearly supersonic without afterburner. And it was very funny when you were flying low and they came, I do not know, 100 feet above you, and they just passed you because, of course, they are faster. It's unbelievable, this aircraft. But look at the engines. It's incredible, the engines they have. And of course, when you fly around and you see a B-52, which have a wingspan of 70 meters, so nearly 200 feet, they fly down to 200 feet. They have to climb for the turn. And when you see it, it's unbelievable. So, yes, at that time, there were so many airplanes around, this different types. This was really great.
And were cameras prohibited in the air or on base?
At that time, I did some pictures later on in Maple Flag with a camera, but this camera was, to have good pictures was nearly 2 kilograms. You can, and if 2 kilograms with 4 or 5G is 8 to 10 kilograms. And the normal things at that time, it was a time where you didn't have really good techniques. This is a little bit a pity that from my time there's not existing like today. With the handy you have HD and you have all the good stuff. I wished I had some at that time. So there were done some pictures. I think I've sent you some. These were taken with we called this with this. I do not know the English word. It's the Spiegelreflex. It's a semi-automatic. You select the lens type and the amount of time how long let's say the negative will get light. And so it was a little bit difficult, and you do not see the result only after development 2 days later. Yeah.
And did you fly any European exercises? And if you did your tactics differ there compared to, being in the US?
Yeah, there was a big difference between what were we assigned to at the beginning. Within the massive retaliation, we just would have, let's say, targets on the other side of the Warsaw Pact, and you would just fly low level and bring your bombs there and return. But the Cormeos, of course, what we learned from Red Flag was adapted, of course, to the, let's say, to what you flew in Germany. Of course, we never flew such big Cormeos there because we do not have the airspace, but we have some exercises. For example, we had exchanges with the Norwegian F-16s or with the French Mirage. So there we exchange a little bit, and then you do, let's say, mini exercises. So let's say by yourself. I was lucky. I was the electronic warfare staff officer of the court of the squadron. I got some special training. I got training against electronic warfare opponents, like let's say anti-artillery or the systems like SA-8 or SA-6 at that time, but as well against fighters. So over the North Sea, we had kind of DACT against, at that time, it was even an F-15 and F-16. And just on the electronic warfare spectrum, not on, let's say, on fighter tactics. So how to make, we had we had some chaff and flare, and we had a kind of repeater jammer to see how it works, some tactics. But this was not for everybody. But this was, let's say, quite funny.
And I've always wanted to know this. Did you ever swap notes with, the RAF GR1 crews? Did you ever get together and say, how do you do things or anything like that? Or were you just completely separate?
No. But within the German Air Force, you have to fly to other bases. This was to train, because at that time you service your aircraft by yourself, even if it would be a tornado base. So to make the hydraulics, to put in fuel, etc. Of course, you do not bring the tanker by yourself, but you make everything. We call it cross country. And I went, of course, to France, but I went quite often to the UK because, I like the UK a little bit. And of course, then you exchange. It was not only on British bases, but as well on, let's say, this US bases in Britain. So I was, of course, back in Cottesmore. I was in Lossiemouth, but I was as well in Lakenheath, Upper Hayford, Mildenhall. It's all this time. And then, of course, it's always overnight. You go there, then you make the cross-servicing things, that they help you and they help me. And then, of course, in the evening, you see these guys. I even had some exchanges with the ADV. So I learned a little bit about the difference. Yeah, unfortunately, never in the air, only let's say, in the officer club. It was funny. Yeah. But of course, they told you they have other tactics, and of course, it's a different aircraft. No. We had an exchange pilot from the British in our squadron, and therefore, of course, we had some experience from them. This was for example, with him, I went 2 times to Lossiemouth. And at that time, there were still tornadoes in Lossiemouth. So of course, we learned a little bit, but you know, the development, the British changed a little bit in another direction. And to be very honest, I think the GR4 was a good tornado, let's say, development. But the German did as well some good things. But they didn't call it the name. For us, it was always the IDS, but they changed a little bit the hardware and software. It was more internally. So we got names for it, but not really, let's say, additional name on the tornado.
And did you ever work with? I've got distracted here, Rudy. Did you ever work with the F-111 crews? You know, out of Upper Hereford, Lake and Heath.
Yeah. We had one time. We had. It was very funny. It was just by chance, and we flew through UK. It was just a normal mission, let's say, like this. It was a 2x2 because we were not allowed to fly formation with them. So we were. I do not know. I think 2 miles separated. So they flew in front and we flew behind. So they were a two-ship and we were, but we flew the same route, and actually it was, so we had a little bit of, let's say, same routing, and of course we did some maneuvering together and so on, because of course even in the UK you always met somewhere another airplane, and if they react on you, you have to react on them.
Sounds so much fun.
But this is not. This is not. You know, this is not foreseen. But it's very funny. At that time, it was allowed, because normally today you only can do what you plan. But at that time, of course, if it was, you react. Of course, we had, of course, rules of engagement. You could not just do what you want. But the rules of engagement were, of course, in general, of course, not crossing flight plans, and if you come opposite, go to the right without crossing flight plans, and you have a basic envelope which you should not go into so too close to the aircraft. But this was it. Yeah. And of course, you have to follow the airspace regulations. Now you
can't just fly around doing what you want.
Yeah. But at that time, it was a little bit, let's say, less restricted.
I also want to thank Aviastorm for helping set us up this interview. They're currently working on a Tornado for the flight simulator and DCS. You can stay up to date with them and their progress on their Facebook page, which will be linked in the description.